The call came at 7:37 on a Tuesday morning. I was stirring my coffee, watching the steam rise from the cup like my breath used to on winter mornings when Marcus was small, before everything changed. Before my son became a stranger wearing my last name like a weapon. His voice cut through the phone line sharp and cold. "Dad, we need to talk." I knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used when he fired his assistant last month. Clinical, detached, the kind of voice that turned people into problems to be solved. "What's on your mind, son?" "Cut the act. You know exactly what this is about." My hand trembled slightly as I set the coffee cup down. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were pressing in. Marcus had always been direct, even as a child, but this felt different. This felt like an ending. "The monthly deposits stop now," he continued. "$1,500 a month for what? So you can sit in that apartment and feel sorry for yourself? I'm done enabling this." The words hit like physical blows. $1,500. The money that kept my lights on, my rent paid, my dignity barely intact. The money that had become the last thread connecting us after his mother died, after I lost the business, after everything fell apart piece by piece. "Marcus, you don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly. You're 62 years old, living off your son's charity. It stops today." The line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone that sounded like flatlined hopes. My reflection stared back from the black screen, an old man whose son had just cut the last rope keeping him afloat. But Marcus didn't know about the safety net I'd been weaving in silence for 23 years. He didn't know about the deed sitting in my desk drawer, the one with his address printed in neat, legal typeface, the one that made me his landlord, not his burden. The story really began 2 decades ago, when Marcus was starting college and I was building something that mattered. Richardson Construction had 3 crews, 12 employees, and enough contracts to keep us busy through the next winter. I was proud of what I'd built from nothing, proud that my son would graduate debt-free, proud that I could finally give him everything I'd never had. That's when I made the investment that would change everything. The property came up for auction, a small duplex in what everyone called the College District, run down, neglected, but in a location that screamed potential. Young professionals were starting to move into the area, property values were climbing, and I had enough saved to make a serious bid. I bought it for $38,000. The plan was simple: renovate it myself, rent it out, build a small real estate portfolio alongside the construction business. Create multiple streams of income, prepare for retirement, maybe leave something meaningful for Marcus when my time came. I spent 6 months gutting that duplex. Evenings after job sites, weekends when I should have been resting, I was there with my hands in drywall dust and paint fumes. Sarah used to bring me sandwiches and complain about the sawdust in my hair, but she understood. We were building something bigger than ourselves. The renovation turned a tired rental into something special: modern kitchen, updated bathrooms, hardwood floors that gleamed under the new lighting. It rented immediately to a young couple who treated it like their first home. That success led to a second property, then a third. By the time Marcus graduated with his business degree, I owned 4 rental properties and was juggling more construction contracts than I'd ever imagined possible. Success felt like momentum, like standing on a wave that could carry us anywhere we wanted to go. But waves crash, and when they do, they take everything with them. The recession hit Richardson Construction like a freight train in the dark. Contracts canceled overnight. Clients who'd been friends for years suddenly couldn't return phone calls. The steady checks that had supported 3 families just stopped coming. I had to let everyone go. Mike Henderson, who'd been with me since the beginning. Janet Rodriguez, who kept our books organized and our coffee pot full. Good people who trusted me to keep their paychecks coming, who had mortgages and kids and dreams that depended on Richardson Construction staying afloat. I sold the construction equipment first. The truck that had been my office, my transportation, my identity for 12 years, went to a dealer in the next county for less than half what I'd paid for it. The tools that had built my reputation filled boxes destined for strangers who wouldn't know their history, wouldn't understand what they'd helped create. But I kept the rental properties. They were generating enough income to cover their costs and put food on our table, and I told myself things would turn around. The economy would recover, construction would bounce back, I'd rebuild what I'd lost. Sarah got sick 6 months later. It started with headaches she dismissed as stress. Then the dizzy spells, the fatigue that sleep couldn't cure, the doctor's appointments that began with optimism and ended with worried faces and hushed consultations in hospital hallways. The diagnosis came on a Thursday afternoon in an office that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams: glioblastoma. The doctor used words like aggressive and palliative, but all I heard was the sound of time running out. Sarah fought for 18 months. 18 months of treatments that cost more than I'd ever imagined possible, of insurance battles that made construction disputes look friendly, of watching the strongest person I'd ever known disappear one piece at a time. I sold the first rental property to pay for experimental treatments the insurance wouldn't cover, $45,000 for something I'd bought for $38,000 and poured my sweat into. It felt like selling memories, but Sarah's life was worth more than any investment. The second property went next, then the third. Each sale bought us more time, more hope, more chances for a miracle that never came. Sarah died on a Tuesday morning in spring, when the trees were budding and the world was pretending everything was beautiful. The funeral cost more than I had left, and for the first time in my life, I had to ask Marcus for money. He gave it without question. $1,500 for the service, flowers that wouldn't bring her back, a reception where people shared memories I already carried in my chest. Marcus was 26, making good money at a tech startup, and seemed genuinely glad to help. "We're family, Dad. This is what family does." That was 3 years ago. The monthly $1,500 started as temporary assistance while I figured out my next move. But temporary became permanent as opportunities refused to materialize, and my confidence eroded like shoreline in a storm. I still had one property left, the duplex where it all began, the first investment that had seemed so smart 23 years ago, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Maybe because it was the last connection to the man I used to be, or maybe because some stubborn part of me still believed I might need it someday. The current tenants were a young couple named David and Christine Miller. He was finishing law school, she was starting her career in marketing, and they treated the place like it was their forever home. Good people who paid on time, took care of the property, never bothered me with minor complaints. Marcus didn't even know the property existed. After Sarah's funeral, I'd never talked about the remaining rental. It wasn't shame exactly, but something close to it. My son was watching his father fall from business owner to dependent, and I couldn't bear to explain how close I was to rock bottom versus actual rock bottom. The duplex was my secret, my backup plan, my last piece of dignity in a life that had stripped away everything else that mattered. But 3 years is a long time to accept help, and Marcus had been growing colder with each monthly transfer. I could hear it in his voice during our weekly phone calls, see it in his face during the holidays we still shared. He was building something impressive with his life, climbing ladders I no longer understood, and his father's dependence must have felt like an anchor dragging him backward. The Tuesday morning call shouldn't have surprised me. In his position, I might have made the same decision. But Marcus had miscalculated something crucial. He thought cutting off my income would force me to get a job, move into government housing, accept reality on his terms. He didn't know that his own housing depended on my signature, my property taxes, my continued good faith as a landlord. The duplex where Marcus and his wife Elena had been living for 8 months was mine. The monthly rent they'd been paying went into an account I never touched, saving for repairs and maintenance I handled myself. They'd found the listing online, toured it with a property management company I contracted with, signed a lease that had my name at the bottom in small print they probably never read carefully. Marcus had no idea he'd been paying rent to his father. I'd told myself I was giving them privacy, letting them feel independent in their first home together. The truth was more complicated. I'd been afraid to tell them, afraid of Marcus's reaction, afraid of disrupting the fragile peace we'd built around scheduled phone calls and holiday visits. Now that peace was shattered anyway. I spent the rest of Tuesday morning sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the lease agreement I'd pulled from my files. Marcus and Elena Miller Richardson, it read, with Elena using both names after their marriage 6 months ago. The monthly rent was $2,200 for a place that could easily command more, but I'd wanted to give them a break without them knowing it was charity. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. My son had been unknowingly paying my mortgage while sending me money for rent in my apartment. He'd been supporting me twice over while building resentment about only one of those expenses. But the bigger irony was still coming. I called the property management company first. Linda Vasquez had been handling the administrative side of my rental for 2 years, and she answered on the second ring. "Mr. Richardson, what can I do for you?" "I need to discuss the Miller-Richardson lease. There's been a change in circumstances." "Oh." Her voice carried immediate concern. "Is everything all right? They've been model tenants." "They have been, but I won't be renewing the lease when it expires next month." Silence stretched across the line. In the background, I could hear office sounds, normal business happening while I prepared to detonate my relationship with my son. "Mr. Richardson, I have to ask, is this related to any issues with the tenants? Because if there are problems, we should discuss solutions before." "No issues with their behavior. This is a business decision." "All right. I'll prepare the non-renewal notice. 30 days from today puts us at the 15th of next month for move-out. Is that correct?" "That's correct." I hung up before I could change my mind. The notice would arrive in their mailbox within 48 hours. A legal document explaining that their lease would not be renewed, that they had 30 days to find alternative housing, that their current living situation was ending whether they wanted it to or not. Marcus would read that notice and feel exactly what I'd felt during his phone call. The ground shifting underneath, the security he'd taken for granted suddenly evaporating, the future becoming uncertain and threatening. But he still wouldn't know the whole truth. Wednesday morning brought another call, this one from Elena. Her voice was tight with panic, the kind of controlled fear that comes from trying to solve a crisis while pretending it's manageable. "Mr. Richardson? This is Elena, Marcus's wife. I hope it's okay that I called, but we received a notice yesterday about our rental." "What kind of notice?" "Non-renewal. The property management company says the owner isn't extending our lease. Marcus is at work, and I thought maybe you might know someone in real estate who could help us understand our options." The deception felt heavier now, pressing against my chest like physical weight. Elena was asking her father-in-law for help with a housing crisis caused by her father-in-law, not knowing the two problems were the same person. What reason did they give for non-renewal? "Business decision. No explanation beyond that. We've never been late with rent, never caused any damage. Our landlord has been great, handled repairs quickly, kept the rent reasonable." I don't understand why this is happening. I closed my eyes. Elena was a good person who'd gotten caught in a war between father and son she didn't even know was happening. She was collateral damage in Marcus's decision to cut me off, but she had no way to understand the connection. "Real estate markets can be unpredictable," I said. "Owners sometimes decide to sell or move back in themselves. I guess it's just terrible timing. Marcus got promoted last month. We were talking about starting a family. Everything was going so well. Now we have to find a new place and come up with first month, last month, and security deposit all over again." Marcus got promoted. While cutting off his father's support, he'd been climbing another ladder, earning more money, building a future that apparently didn't include obligations to the man who'd raised him. "Have you told Marcus about the notice?" "Not yet. He's been stressed about work, and I wanted to look into our options before adding more pressure. You know how he gets when he feels like there's a problem he can't control." I knew exactly how he got. Marcus attacked problems like military campaigns, gathering intelligence, developing strategies, executing with precision. It's how he'd built his career from entry-level to management in 5 years. But it's also how he'd approached cutting me off, like I was a problem to be solved rather than his father. "Elena, when you do talk to Marcus, suggest he contact the property management company directly. Sometimes landlords will reconsider if there's a compelling reason." "You think there's a chance?" "There's always a chance." She thanked me and hung up, probably feeling slightly better about a situation that was about to get much worse. Because the compelling reason Marcus would need to provide was an apology to a father he didn't know he'd been wronging in layers. Thursday brought the call I'd been expecting and dreading. "What the hell is going on?" Marcus's voice was raw with stress and confusion. "Elena got some bullshit eviction notice, and the property management company won't explain anything." "It's not an eviction, son. It's non-renewal." "What's the difference? We're losing our home either way. I need you to help me figure this out." The irony was so thick, I could taste it. Marcus needed my help solving a crisis I'd created, asking for support from the father he'd cut off 3 days earlier. What do you want me to do? You know people in construction, in real estate. Someone must know who owns the property, what's really going on. This doesn't make sense. We're good tenants, we pay on time, we take care of the place. Sometimes these decisions aren't about the tenants. Then what are they about? Money? Is someone offering the owner more rent? Because I can negotiate. I got promoted, we can afford an increase if that's what this is about. Marcus was scrambling, trying to throw money at a problem that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with the money he'd refused to give to someone else. He was learning what it felt like when financial security disappeared without warning, when the future became uncertain because someone else held the power. But he still didn't know the someone else was me. Marcus, maybe this is an opportunity to evaluate what you really need in a living situation. An opportunity? Dad, this is our home. We've painted the walls, Elena planted a garden, we have friends in the neighborhood. This isn't some rental property to us, it's where we plan to start our family. The pain in his voice was real and sharp. Marcus wasn't just losing housing, he was losing the foundation he'd built his dreams on. The same way I'd lost my foundation when he'd cut me off, but he couldn't see the parallel yet. You'll find something else. That's it? That's your advice? Find something else? I thought you'd want to help. Help costs money, son, and according to you, I need to learn to solve my own problems. The silence that followed was thick with recognition. Marcus was starting to understand that his housing crisis and his father's financial abandonment might be connected, but he couldn't see how yet. This is different. Is it? You're my father. Elena and I haven't done anything wrong. Neither had I. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning, connections forming, the slow recognition that something bigger was happening. Dad, what aren't you telling me? Same thing you didn't tell me before you cut off my support. That courtesy goes both ways. I hung up before he could respond. Friday morning, the property management company called again. Mr. Richardson, I have some news about the Miller-Richardson lease situation. What kind of news? The tenants are requesting a meeting with the property owner. They want to negotiate directly, apparently make some kind of personal appeal. Linda's voice carried professional neutrality, but I could hear the curiosity underneath. Should I arrange something, or would you prefer to handle it through our office? The moment I'd been orchestrating was finally arriving. Marcus wanted to meet the landlord who was displacing him, not knowing he'd been living in his father's property all along. Not knowing that his housing crisis was connected to his decision to abandon his father's financial needs. Schedule the meeting. Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. Give them the address for my apartment. Your apartment? Shouldn't we meet at our office? The owner prefers to handle sensitive situations in private. All right, I'll make the arrangements. Saturday afternoon arrived gray and cold, with the kind of wind that cuts through clothes and gets into bones. I arranged my coffee table carefully, laying out the documents Marcus would need to understand the full scope of what had happened. The original deed, showing my purchase of the duplex 23 years ago. The lease agreement with their signatures, proving they'd been my tenants for 8 months without knowing it. The rent payment history, showing $2,200 deposited monthly into an account they'd never known existed. The bank statement showing $1,500 transferred monthly from Marcus to me, funding my apartment rent while he unknowingly paid my mortgage. 2:15 brought a knock at my door. Marcus stood in the hallway with Elena beside him, both dressed like they were attending a business meeting that would determine their future, which, in a way, they were. Marcus wore the gray suit I'd seen him in at his company Christmas party, Elena, a professional dress that made her look older than her 28 years. They clearly expected to be going somewhere else. Dad? Marcus's confusion was immediate and deep. What are you doing here? We're supposed to meet with our landlord. I stepped back from the door. You are. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Marcus's face as the words processed, as the impossible became real, as the crisis in his housing and the crisis in his relationship with his father revealed themselves to be the same crisis. No. His voice was barely a whisper. No, that's not possible. I gestured to the coffee table where the documents waited like evidence in a trial. Sit down. Elena moved first, settling onto my couch like she was afraid it might collapse under her weight. Marcus remained standing, staring at the papers spread before him like they were written in a language he couldn't read. 23 years ago, I began. I bought a duplex as an investment property. The first rental I ever owned back when Richardson Construction was thriving, and I thought I was building something that would last forever. Marcus picked up the deed, his hands shaking slightly as he read his current address listed as the property location. You owned our house. I own your house. This whole time, we've been paying rent to you. $2,200 a month for 8 months. Good tenants, never late, never complained about minor issues. Elena was looking back and forth between Marcus and the documents like she was watching a tennis match played with artillery. I don't understand, she said. Why didn't you tell us? Because your husband needed to feel independent. He didn't want to accept help from his father, didn't want to feel like charity was keeping him afloat. So I let you pay market rate for a place I owned, let him feel like he was making it on his own. Marcus dropped the deed like it was burning his fingers. You've been manipulating us. I've been helping you, there's a difference. By lying? By giving you exactly what you wanted, independence, self-sufficiency, the pride of paying your own way without Daddy's help. Marcus started pacing 3 steps toward the window, 3 steps back, like a caged animal looking for escape. But you were also taking $1,500 from me. Yes. While I was already paying your mortgage with my rent. Yes. So I was supporting you twice without knowing it. Yes. Elena's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Marcus, sit down. He stopped pacing but didn't sit, standing behind the couch like he was ready to bolt for the door. Elena turned to me, her expression harder than I'd ever seen it. Mr. Richardson, I respect that this is between you and Marcus, but I need to understand something. When you decided not to renew our lease, did you consider that we're innocent parties in whatever conflict you two have going on? The question hit harder than Marcus's accusations because it was absolutely fair. Elena had gotten caught in a war between father and son that she'd never chosen to join. You're right, this should be between Marcus and me. But it's not anymore, because I'm the one who has to find us a new place to live in 3 weeks. I'm the one who has to explain to my mother why we're moving suddenly. I'm the one who has to give up the garden I planted and the life we were building. Marcus finally sat down, sinking into the couch beside his wife like his legs had given out. Elena, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Nobody told me anything. I've been living in this nightmare for 5 days while you two played some twisted game with each other. I looked at Elena, this young woman who'd married into my mess of a family and was now paying the price for conflicts that started before she'd ever met my son. You're right to be angry. I'm not angry, Mr. Richardson. I'm disappointed. Marcus told me you were a good man who'd hit some hard times. But good men don't use innocent people as weapons against their own children. The words cut deep because they were true. In my anger over Marcus's abandonment, I'd turned Elena into collateral damage. I'd made her homeless to teach my son a lesson about gratitude. Marcus was reading through the bank statements now, seeing the pattern of incoming rent and outgoing support that had defined our relationship for 8 months. Why didn't you just tell me? Would it have changed anything? I don't know. Maybe. Marcus, last Tuesday you called me to end my financial support. You said $1,500 a month was enabling me, that I needed to accept reality. What reality would that be? He didn't answer, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The reality where your 62-year-old father gets a minimum wage job to afford rent somewhere. The reality where I lose my apartment and move into a room somewhere, sharing space with strangers because my son decided I was costing too much. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. You decided I was a burden, a problem to be solved by cutting off support. But you didn't know the support was supporting you, too. Elena was reading the lease agreement now, seeing their signatures on a document that made me their landlord. This is so messed up, she said quietly. Marcus set down the bank statements and looked at me directly for the first time since he'd realized the truth. What do you want, Dad? I want my son back. I never went anywhere. Yes, you did. You went to a place where your father became an expense instead of a person, where helping me became enabling instead of loving. where cutting me off felt like tough love instead of abandonment. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands while Elena read through documents that revealed the layers of deception and support that had defined their housing situation. I thought I was helping you become independent. By taking away the only income keeping me housed. Yes. Marcus, I spent 30 years building a business, raising a son, taking care of a family. I lost everything to a recession and medical bills. At 62, independence looks different than it does at 29. Elena closed the lease agreement and set it back on the coffee table. So what happens now? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had burned everything down. Now you understand why I couldn't renew your lease. Marcus's head snapped up. What does that mean? It means I need to sell the property to survive without your support. I can't afford to keep it as a rental when I don't have other income. The lie came easily, but it wasn't really a lie. Without Marcus's monthly support, I would eventually need to sell the duplex to cover my living expenses. Maybe not immediately, but soon enough. Elena touched Marcus's arm. We could pay more rent. Marcus turned to her, surprise clear on his face. Elena, we can't afford more rent. The promotion helps, but not enough to significantly increase housing costs. Then what are our options? I leaned back in my chair, watching my son and daughter-in-law realize that their housing crisis and my financial crisis were connected in ways that made simple solutions impossible. There's one option, I said slowly. Marcus looked suspicious. Which is? We figure out how to be a family again. The room went quiet except for the sound of wind against windows and the distant hum of traffic from the street below. Marcus was thinking, working through scenarios and calculations like he always did when facing a complex problem. What would that look like? It would look like honesty. No more secrets about property ownership, no more assumptions about what independence means, no more cutting each other off when things get complicated. Elena was nodding slowly. It would also mean we all have to forgive some things. She was right. Marcus would have to forgive my deception about owning his home. I would have to forgive his willingness to abandon me financially. Elena would have to forgive both of us for dragging her into a conflict she'd never chosen. Marcus stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the street where he'd grown up, where he'd learned to ride a bike and fight with neighborhood kids and dream about futures that seemed possible. I never wanted to hurt you, Dad. I know. I thought tough love was the right thing. Maybe it sometimes is, but not when the person you're being tough with is barely staying afloat. He turned back to face me. And I never knew about Mom's medical bills. You never told me how much. You were starting your career. I didn't want to bury you with my problems. But they became my problems anyway, didn't they? Yes. Elena was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a conversation that had been waiting 20 years to happen. Marcus sat back down, closer to me this time. What if we started over? What would that mean? It would mean I keep paying $1,500 a month, but as rent contribution instead of charity. Elena and I stay in the duplex, but as family members working out a fair arrangement, not as tenants being deceived by their landlord. I considered this. It would solve the immediate housing crisis and restore the financial support I needed, but it would also change our relationship permanently. You'd be comfortable living in a property your father owns. More comfortable than I was living there without knowing. Elena was smiling for the first time since she'd walked into my apartment. It actually makes more sense this way. We help you with the property maintenance and costs. You help us with stable housing we can afford. Everyone wins. Marcus reached across and took my hand. Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong about the financial support. I was wrong to cut you off without understanding your situation better. And I'm sorry for not telling you about the duplex. I should have been honest from the beginning. Elena was crying now, quiet tears that seemed to be releasing weeks of stress and uncertainty. Can we please go home now, she asked, to our home that won't disappear in 3 weeks? I called Linda at the property management company that evening. The lease situation has been resolved, I told her. The tenants will be staying, and we're transitioning to a family arrangement. That's wonderful news. Should I prepare paperwork for the new terms? No need. We'll handle it privately from here. Understood. I'm glad it worked out. Marcus and Elena invited me for dinner the following Sunday. Their duplex, Our duplex looked different now that I could see it without deception. Elena's garden was more elaborate than I'd realized, with vegetables and herbs that would be ready for harvest in a few weeks. Marcus had painted an accent wall in their bedroom, chosen colors that made the space feel warmer and more permanent. We talked about practical things. Who would handle which repairs, how to split property taxes fairly, whether they wanted to eventually buy the place from me or treat it as a long-term rental arrangement. But mostly, we talked about honesty. About the assumptions we'd made about each other, the help we'd given and received without acknowledgement, the ways pride and love and fear had twisted our relationships into shapes that hurt everyone involved. Elena made her mother's recipe for pot roast, and Marcus opened a bottle of wine that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week. We sat around their kitchen table, my kitchen table, I reminded myself, and remembered what it felt like to be family. The monthly financial arrangement continued, but now it had a different shape. Marcus transferred $1,500, which became their contribution to mortgage, taxes, and utilities. Elena took over coordinating repairs and maintenance, which saved me the stress of managing contractors and scheduling. I provided stability and below-market housing costs, which allowed them to save money and plan for their future. Everyone got what they needed, but more importantly, everyone understood what they were giving and receiving. 3 months later, Elena told me she was pregnant. We were having coffee in their living room, our living room, on a Saturday morning when she made the announcement. Marcus was beaming with the kind of pride and terror that comes with approaching fatherhood, and Elena was glowing in the way people do when their dreams start becoming real. "We wanted you to be among the first to know," Marcus said. "Because you're going to be grandpa, and because this baby is going to grow up in a house owned by someone who loves them," Elena added. I thought about Sarah then, about how much she would have loved to meet her grandchild, about the ways grief and joy can occupy the same moment without canceling each other out. "She would have been so happy," I said. Marcus nodded, understanding immediately who I meant. "She would have loved Elena. She would have loved watching you become a father." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, thinking about the woman who'd shaped us both in different ways, whose absence still left holes in conversations and holiday celebrations. But we also sat in the knowledge that we'd found our way back to each other. That the deception and anger and financial warfare had ultimately led to a more honest relationship, a more sustainable family structure, a future that included all of us. The duplex where it all started still stands, still houses my son and daughter-in-law, and now a grandchild I get to watch grow up 20 minutes from my apartment. The investment I made 23 years ago finally paid dividends, just not in the way I'd originally imagined. Marcus never cut me off financially again. But more importantly, I never had to ask him to restore support because we'd built something better than charity. We'd built partnership. Elena was right that first day in my apartment. Good men don't use innocent people as weapons against their own children. But sometimes desperate fathers do things that hurt people they love, and sometimes stubborn sons make decisions that abandon people who need them. The trick is figuring out how to forgive each other and build something better from the pieces. The property deed still sits in my desk drawer, but now Marcus has a copy too. Transparency, we've learned, makes everything easier. Love shouldn't require deception, and help shouldn't feel like burden. My grandchild will grow up in a house owned by family, surrounded by people who've learned that independence and interdependence aren't opposites. That financial support can be mutual rather than one-directional. That honesty is harder than deception but creates relationships that can survive anything. The call that started everything happened on a Tuesday morning in spring. The resolution came months later, on a Saturday morning when Elena announced the continuation of our family line in a house that had seen us through our worst and brought out our best. Marcus still transfers $1,500 every month, but now I thank him for it, and he knows exactly what it's buying for all of us. That makes all the difference.